welcome to the 4th edition of the LoJoWo podcast. The last episode I made was really long, and I apologize for that. I know I said that I wanted to keep episodes between a 30 to 60 minute length, but with last episode being not sped up like my previous episodes were, and also just having, I think, more content to get through in the last episode, it really just made it a lot longer. I think it was like an hour and a half. Obviously, the speed has a lot to do with that. If it was 25% shorter, it would be a lot closer to under 60 minutes. I don't think it would be quite yet, but not great at math. Last episode was also really hard to make just because, I had a script and things written up for it at one point that I kind of spent multiple hours on preparing for recording that podcast. And the first take I did recording it, I accidentally had my sensitivity on my microphone, on my crappy gaming headset, turned up really high. I don't know how it got turned up. I've never intentionally changed that before. But I noticed, listening back to what I recorded, that there was a ton of buzzing background noise that basically made it impossible to jump cut around in the podcast audio. So there was nothing I could really do editing-wise. So I decided to delete it and re-record it. And that was, an audio file that I spent almost 2 hours recording. So that was a lot of wasted time. And so I was pretty upset already with myself. And then I noticed that I didn't even save my script that I wrote up for it because I didn't think I was going to need it again. So, not wanting to spend the time to do all that stuff again, I decided to just record and go through everything I just did again, just kind of from memory, and just kind of look up stats and stuff as I went. Because on the script I had all the stats and things I was going to use all collected and stuff. So the recording part of that just took a lot longer because I was doing it more by memory, and I think it was also just kind of rushed in, not really wanting to record extra stuff after I got that finished, and kind of going through editing, noticing things that I wanted to change or wanted to say differently, or things like that. I was really just kind of more worried about the time frame in which I was uploading because I wanted to get a lot of episodes in, before the NBA restart. So then I actually put up the episode, even though I wasn't really happy with it. And then just, a few hours later, listening back to it again, I really started to just be unhappy with it. So I decided, I'm not just going to do this just because, I want to get a certain amount of episodes in. I want to actually be happy with the episodes that I make. So I decided to delete it and make a new one. But I kept, a lot of the audio that I did record from that second take. What you're hearing in that episode that I released, episode 3, is a bunch of different recordings from different days throughout basically a week's time almost, because I had a lot of plans over the weekend, and I initially recorded stuff on Wednesday that I didn't use, and then I re-recorded stuff basically on Thursday and Friday, and then I finished all my recording stuff on Monday, and then I finished editing and everything on Tuesday and uploaded it Tuesday night, which was last night. So that's how all that went, and so it was just a really frustrating episode for me to make, but I am happy with how it turned out. So, I guess no regrets there. And I'm only going to get better at this whole process and stuff as I go along. The editing of these podcasts is really what takes the bulk of the work. And it takes a lot more effort than I really anticipated too. So, I think probably what I'm going to start doing, looking forward to in the future for scheduling of these episodes, I'm probably just going to do like one episode a week, I'm guessing. Not much more than that, if it is more. Just because of how much editing takes, and I have other stuff to do. I have a job and stuff like that, so it would be awesome if I could do this as a job one day. That would be super fun, but obviously not an easy thing to pull off. So that's why I really appreciate all the support I can get from people just listening to the podcast and sharing the podcast with people, stuff like that. I really appreciate any of that. So, but yeah, I thought I would give you a shorter episode this time, just to make up for the long episode last time. So hopefully this one's shorter. So this episode I wanted to talk about the all defensive teams and Defensive Player of the Year award. And that's really all I'm going to touch on, I think, just to keep this episode short. A couple things from last episode that I wanted to touch on. So last episode I spent most of the time talking about MVP ladder and all NBA teams. One thing I did notice, just like not long after I finished recording all my stuff for that episode, is I listened to the Zach Lowe podcast, a new episode where him and Rachel Nichols and Howard Beck from Bleacher Report, they all went through their All-NBA teams, their ballots that, they're actual people with votes on these ballots. So like they went through the ballots they filled out. And one thing that's new this year that I didn't anticipate was that players can be listed in multiple positions. They apparently on their ballots they had drop downs on which positions are available for each player to be listed at. and there's just way more freedom in that regard than there ever has been. So Anthony Davis was eligible for forward and center spot. Even Nikola Jokic was eligible for a forward spot, which was surprising. He barely ever plays four, and that's only when they're bringing in Mason Plumlee sometimes to have a dual center lineup. So, in hindsight, if I would have known all that, I probably would have put Anthony Davis at center on my All-NBA teams. I do kind of mention that, though, in the episode that I did do. Also, I was actually really proud to see, because I had not looked at any other people's choices for All-NBA teams and stuff like that before I did my podcast. I really wanted to just be like my own thoughts and opinions on the seasons these guys have had. And, listening to Zach Lowe, Rachel Nichols, and Howard Beck all list off their All-NBA teams, I was actually really proud of how similar ours are. Each of them were not exactly the same as mine. We all had little differences here and there, but I was proud to see how pretty much in line with a lot of these people who do this for a living I was. So, and a lot of their takes on some of the players that they went through, reasons they had, people where they did, a lot of things that I thought about as well. So that was pretty cool. The other thing was when I was talking about the Knicks hiring Tom Thibodeau. Obviously, and I do think I said in the last episode that I thought it was a good hire, and I still do agree with that. He's a great coach, obviously deserving of a job in the NBA. Not a bad hire by any means. But I also did mention something about having a more progressive coach in terms of coaching philosophy and X's and O's and stuff like that I would have brought in instead of Tom Thibodeau just for the Knicks situation. And I really do still agree with that. And just to expand a little bit more on that, one of the other candidates for the coaching job was Kenny Atkinson, who has coached the Nets the last several seasons and was an assistant with Mike Budenholzer on those Atlanta Hawks teams. I think Kenny Atkinson really would have been a great choice for that job, mainly just because he is a huge developmental coach. He's a very good developmental coach. He brought that Nets team from probably the worst situation any team has been in a long time for any NBA team, just because in the wake of that horrible Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce trade that went down back in the early 2010s. He really turned around that situation where, they didn't have any draft picks really to cultivate, young talent, and he really just developed a winning culture there and developed a lot of young players and really turned them around super quick. And now look at them. They have Kyrie and KD because of that culture that Kenny Atkinson developed. I think that Kenny Atkinson would be a perfect pick for the Knicks head coaching job. Like, their end goal is trying to get a situation where they can get people to want to come to the Knicks, get big names and people to want to be on the Knicks, and they think they can get that just by signing these big names, signing a Tom Thibodeau as a head coach, trying to sign people in the offseason. Just jumping straight to that point is what James Dolan and the whole crew has seemed to been trying to do over and over for the past, several years. They're trying to reach that as an end goal, but I think the route to get there, they need to actually start from the ground level. Hire a progressive developmental coach who's going to cultivate your young talent, who's going to create a winning culture for the future. And once you have this winning culture and this, kind of feisty young team that, is showing some promise and a bright future and stuff like that, that is what's going to attract people to your team, attract off-season acquisitions and things like that. You need to take that route. You can't just take the easy way out by trying to jump straight to, we're going to hire this huge coach. He's going to get us turned around because people like Tom Thibodeau. People are going to want to come play for the Knicks because of Tom Thibodeau, stuff like that. I think that is really part of the reason they did hire him, because he's a big name. That was just a little bit of a rant on the Knicks' decisions in hiring and things like that I think that I would just change personally. I think I'm going to jump on into the all-defensive teams now. So if you listen to my last episode, you'll know that for these teams, I'm doing 2 guard spots, 2 forward spots, and a center spot for each of them. There are 2 all-defensive teams, all-defensive first team, all-defensive second team. And positions, I think, even get more wacky on defense, just because a lot of these best players, in terms of defensive players, are really versatile. A lot of times they can defend a lot of different people. They can just defend multiple positions and things like that, so it's hard to really categorize them. And also knowing what the NBA is actually kind of doing this season with the All-NBA voting and stuff, having kind of a lot of wiggle room in terms of position where people are listed at, I think I will kind of take advantage of that a little bit. So I'm going to start with the all-defensive first team. My first guard on the all-defensive first team is Ben Simmons. Ben Simmons has led the league in steals this year. He's been obviously a tremendous, versatile defender. Listing him at guard was something I was really iffy about, just because, technically he is listed at guard in, all the games that he does play. But defensively, it's really hard to call him a guard just because he hardly ever guards backcourt players. Like he can and he does sometimes, but that's never his like primary assignment. He's always guarding forwards is what you're going to see him guarding, and he's guarded by forwards. So it's weird to me to call Ben Simmons a guard. Does he have guard like skills? Yes, but is he like an actual guard? Should he actually be listed as a guard, especially on defense? I don't know about that. But I did list him at guard just because I know that technically I can get away with that for sure, because that is basically his primary position that he's listed at most of the time, and because it really makes it a lot easier to fit the best 5 defenders on this all-defensive first team for me, the guys that I think should be on this list. It just kind of, because, forward and center spots are the most loaded positions in terms of all defensive teams usually, and that is also true this year. So just moving Ben Simmons to guard for me made it a lot easier. That's why I decided to do that. Ben Simmons, super good season, one of the candidates for Defensive Player of the Year, which I'll touch on later. He's just been somebody that they can put on the opposing team's best player, so that is definitely a plus for him too. My second guard is Marcus Smart. Has some of the best hands in the league, one of the highest IQ defenders I think in the league. Really hustles on defense, is a intense, amazing glue guy for that Boston Celtics team. What's really impressive about him to me is, he's only like 6'3", but he guards the other team's best player. Usually really doesn't matter who it is or how big that guy is. They put him on like Kawhi a lot, I've seen. It obviously does kind of get out of his range when they're facing the Bucks and he has to guard Giannis or something like that. They typically won't put him on those type of players. But Kawhi is a huge dude compared to a guy like Marcus Smart, and that's just really impressive that he actually does do quite a good job guarding those guys. And in terms of just backcourt defenders, I don't think there is a better defender in the league than Marcus Smart. My 2 forward spots are for Giannis Antetokounmpo and Anthony Davis, and I'll actually go through their cases later just because those are my 2 picks for Defensive Player of the Year, and I'm going to break down the differences in their cases and ultimately who I think I would give the award to. I've really kind of narrowed it down to just those 2 for this Defensive Player of the Year award, so I'll save the breakdown of each of them for that a little bit later. Then moving on to my center spot on my all-defensive first team, and that is the winner of the previous 2 Defensive Player of the Year awards, and that is the Stifle Tower. So Rudy Gobert is obviously a premier shot blocker, really one of the best shot blockers in NBA history. He's not quite as versatile as a lot of these other guys. Doesn't stay in front of quick, shifty guards super well. There's that really famous clip of Rudy Gobert getting switched on to Chris Paul, and Chris Paul kind of embarrasses him. So that is where Gobert falls a little bit short. But, obviously, playing his role deep inside, there's really nobody in the league better than Rudy Gobert in terms of playing defense in that restricted area. So yeah, that is why he has ended up here at the center spot on my all-defensive first team. So moving on to the all-defensive second team, my first guard is Jrue Holiday. Jrue Holiday is a phenomenal defender. He really is one of the best defensive guards in the league. I think he really is up there with Marcus Smart, giving him a run for his money. A lot of things I was saying about Marcus Smart earlier, about how he guards bigger players really well. I think Jrue Holiday is even better at that, but mainly because Jrue Holiday is a bit bigger than Marcus Smart. He's about 3 inches taller, has a longer wingspan. Jrue Holiday, I think, is the best guard in the NBA at post defense, so that is a really big thing. And obviously, he can do it all. He can stay in front of quick, shifty guards, really quick hands, gets a lot of steals, but he really just is a pest on that end of the floor. My next guard is Jimmy Butler. So Jimmy Butler is the second guard on my all-defensive second team. Jimmy Butler, obviously don't need to go too much into him. He's a dog on the defensive end of the floor. He's just super effective there. Can guard lots of different players. He usually guards the opposite team's best player. Even when they're quick, shifty point guards, he guards Damian Lillard, he guards Kemba Walker, he guards, all those kind of guys when he needs to. And he is usually the best option on his team to put on those guys. Really quick hands, just makes really smart defensive plays. There isn't a lot I can say that's different with a lot of these different players. Defense is something that's a little bit harder to expand on. Obviously, way less measurable than the offensive end of the floor. A lot less metrics to go by in terms of defense than there are for offense. Really, the only counting stats there are on defense are steals and blocks, and those are 2 wildly unmeaningful stats in terms of defense usually. Who gets the most steals, who gets the most blocks is not necessarily the person who is the better player at defense. It can be something that you can point to when those steals and blocks really do mean something, but, when someone like Hassan Whiteside is leading the league in blocks, He's obviously a negative on the defensive end of the floor, just mainly because of effort. He really does hunt out blocks, getting more, his block average per game up there, and he really doesn't chase or contest many shots. He just, there's so many times people just go right around him, put layups up. He's really just not that much of a defensive force on that end of the floor at all. But he is somebody that leads the league in blocks. Steph Curry, James Harden, Allen Iverson are all people that have led the league in steals when they're just, they're getting those because of how many times they gamble for steals, how many times they jump out and go for the steals, and most of the time they do get burned on those plays that they do go for those steals, but they still do rack up a ton of them just because of how many times they're gambling for them. So, those numbers are very hard to take seriously a lot of times. That's why I haven't been just going to steals and blocks when reading through these players. It's not something that, you really can look to most of the time. But, it obviously is something, though. That's for sure. So my first forward on the All-NBA second team is Kawhi Leonard. Obviously, we've seen Kawhi lose a step on defense the last several years with just adding more offensive load to his game, and also that nagging degenerative injury that he has in his knee that he suffered several years back against the Warriors in the playoffs, I believe. On that infamous play, Zaza Pachulia, the center for the Warriors, he came out and contested Kawhi's shot and landed in the area that Kawhi was going to come down and land in while Kawhi was shooting his jump shot. And Kawhi came down and his foot landed on top of Zaza Pachulia's foot, and there was, some bad motion that happened in his knee. I'm not a doctor. I don't really know exactly what's wrong with his knee, but all I know is it's described as a degenerative injury that he's going to have to manage for the entirety of his career. So that's why Kawhi is load managed so much and misses a lot of games, is because he's managing that knee injury. He limped his way to the finals last season, really. You could see him dial up the effort so much more in the fourth quarter. He's just really strategic, and when he gives forth, a lot of effort on the defensive end of the floor now. But, I thought I would include him on here just because of when he needs to be, when he does have it dialed in, and when he, it's important. He is still the best perimeter defender in the NBA, and that's just my opinion. That's why I thought he did deserve a spot on here. And even, with him not really putting much effort in on that end right now, or this season, just because he's conserving all that stuff, he still is a solid candidate for this spot, just because that is how good he is on that end of the floor, just not the defensive player of the year candidate that he used to be. My next forward is Bam Adebayo. He's somebody that can be listed at center or forward, so to fit my ideal roster here for the All-NBA second team, I did list Bam Adebayo at forward. Talked about him last episode. He's a lot like the Anthony Davis, Ben Simmons, Giannis Antetokounmpo type defender, can guard, lots of different positions, flies up and down the court, good, solid rim protector, super athletic, gets a lot of really, highlight reel blocks and everything like that. He has, the speed and mobility to stay in front of guards for the most part. He does a pretty good job of that. He's still very young, so we'll definitely see some growth in those areas, I think, as his career goes along, and maybe we will end up with a year with Bam Adebayo being a legit Defensive Player of the Year frontrunner. I do think that he does have a solid case with ending up in the top 5 or 6 for Defensive Player of the Year this year, but I think this season this is where he ends up for me on the All-Defensive second team as a forward. My center on the All-Defensive second team is Brook Lopez. I did touch on Brook Lopez quite a bit in that second episode, I believe, with him really playing to his strengths, being the drop coverage defender that he is. He's a very solid rim protector, one of the best in the NBA this season, and he does really elevate that Bucks defensive rating to that all-time status that it is. Without him on that end, they are basically just, they're still the number 1 defense in the league, but adding him into that equation really elevates them to an all-time placement. Yeah, so he definitely has been a very vital part of that defense this season and a vital part to their game plan. I thought he was deserving of a nod here at the center spot for the all-defensive second team. A couple other guys that I wanted to mention really quick, just because I did kind of think of them as I was going through this list. Guys that I think are awesome defenders in the NBA right now, just didn't make the cut for me this season. And the first one is Chris Dunn. Chris Dunn was a tremendous defender this season. A lot of defensive metrics really loved him. He's one of the best defensive guards in the NBA. Really where I decided to put Butler over him this season was just, Holiday and Butler are having the defensive impact that they are having on much better teams than Chris Dunn is with the Bulls. They're just seeing more team success, and I think that, their impact can be more attributed to, winning an NBA game than Chris Dunn's is on this Chicago Bulls team that really is just racking up loss after loss this season. Yeah, Chris Dunn does have a bright future in this league as a very solid defender in the backcourt. Avery Bradley has just been a huge guy for the Lakers this season, guarding point guards super well. That's really his role, though. He really excels at that. I think one of the best in the league at guarding point guards, guarding traditional point guards. But, outside of that, he doesn't do too much on the defensive end of the floor just because lack of size and stuff like that. But, he does really do a great job of that. And then I also wanted to list on there, two of my Nuggets, Gary Harris and Torrey Craig, are just awesome this season. I think defense is a harder thing to see in players just because of the lack of stats and metrics for it. So when you are a fan of the team, you get to see, how good of a defensive player they are a lot more than you would if, with players that you don't watch quite as much. So that might be a little bit of a bias for me, kind of throwing Harris and Craig into this conversation. But I think they're both just super underrated defenders. Gary Harris has some of the best hands in the league. I know I've said that about a few people, but Gary Harris really does. Just the way he can swipe for steals and just all the time. Like his hands are always something you have to watch and get ready for. I think Gary Harris just makes me happy on the defensive end of the floor as a fan, more than I think anybody I've ever been a fan of. Some of these just high leverage plays where he just gets us a new possession by, hitting it off of an opposing player or, just stripping the ball or, things like that. Just as a fan, those types of plays just make you so happy and make you love the guy so much. Torrey Craig, obviously another guy that is a super good defender on the Nuggets. Also, just wanted to throw him out there because he had, I believe, one for sure, but I believe 2 game-winning blocks this season, which is just huge. I love that when, a game can be won with a defensive stop like that on just a huge block. He's had at least one of those this season. He does a great job of guarding both guards and forwards on the defensive end of the floor. He's just a great lockdown defender for us, and so I thought I'd throw him in there. Now to finish off with the Defensive Player of the Year award. Like I said before, I've really narrowed it down to just Giannis and AD. Both of them have had awesome defensive seasons. I think this race is quite a bit closer than the MVP race is for me. It really is a bit of a toss-up for me at this point. It's really hard for me to pick just one. On one hand, I think Giannis has had the level of season to join Hakeem and Jordan as to become, one of the only 3 players of all time to ever win Defensive Player of the Year the same season as an MVP award. And the other 2 things both of those guys did that season was, they also won Finals MVP. They won the championship and won Finals MVP those seasons as well. So if Giannis could do all those things, that would be, a pretty cool storybook ending to a season. But, that is getting caught up in narrative, which I like to stay away from, just because I think the awards shouldn't be based around narrative. It should be based around the actual criteria of the award. So I try not to let motives and things like that sway me very much. But, I obviously like both of these players a lot. I think AD is also a tremendous talent that is deserving of a Defensive Player of the Year award at some point in his career. And this would be the first one for either of them. The differences between them, like Anthony Davis has been more of a lockdown defender this year in the terms of throwing him on an opposing threat, like one of the best players on the other team, to really slow another player down and really do that, kind of old-fashioned one-on-one lockdown type defense stuff. That's something that Anthony Davis has been really good at this year. With Giannis, on the other hand, he hasn't really been unleashed like that very much, just because, like I've said in other episodes with Mike Budenholzer, Coach Bud of the Bucks, how he really just has one game plan that he uses a lot. He doesn't really make a whole lot of switches or, game plan changes from team to team, playing different teams. So their defensive game plan is always just guarding the pick and roll and having Brook Lopez in drop coverage. And when Brook Lopez does need to chase a three-point shooter or close out on something, Giannis is always guarding the worst three-point shooter on the offense, on the opposing team. So he has the freedom to lurk and sag off and jump into helping situations and just really be the most overqualified help defender of all time, basically. At least as far as I know, I've never really heard of an elite Defensive Player of the Year playing that kind of role other than Draymond Green. Draymond Green was really the only kind of guy that's his game. And, with Draymond Green, that really is his whole defensive game plan. Like, he is just like a lurking defender who can he doesn't guard the best player on the other team. He's not a good one-on-one defender per se, but he is a smart team defender and can jump and help wherever he needs to, basically, is how Draymond Green gets it done on that end of the floor. Giannis, as we've seen him in the past, he can really be dominant in both ways. He can really, he's a tremendous physical specimen to guard one-on-one, most positions and most players. He is a bit slower on his feet than AD is. AD has quicker footwork in terms of staying in front of quick guards. AD is definitely a more versatile defender, a better Swiss Army knife in terms of, just guarding 1 through 5. I think most people would agree with that. If you're looking at just guarding 5s, I think AD is a better rim protector. He is, I think, a little bit just more in terms of a traditional post defender. I think he's just a little bit more adept at that. And then also when you're putting him on a point guard, he's just quicker on his feet and can stay in front of point guards, shift your guards better than Giannis can. But versatility doesn't always mean better, but it is a plus. What Giannis has as a case really going for him is that he's led the Bucks to one of the best defensive ratings of all time this season, and he's been the biggest part of that. Like I said before with Brook Lopez, that he really elevates that team to an all-time status, which is true. But, if you look at minutes this season where Giannis was on the floor without a Lopez brother, they were still the best defense in the league. But if you look at minutes where Giannis wasn't on the floor and all they had protecting the rim was a Lopez brother, their defense was really middle of the pack. It was like 15th, 16th in the league. So that is a huge drop-off, obviously attributed to the defensive prowess of Giannis Antetokounmpo. In terms of guarding each other in a one-on-one scenario, just trying to think about defense, I think AD might be able to stop Giannis a little bit better than Giannis would be able to stop AD. That's just in my opinion. That's just what I would probably bet on. I think AD is a little bit more of a skilled defender than Giannis. I think Giannis has more of a workhorse type intensity on the defensive end of the floor. I think that's really the main differences in their defensive style, like in their defensive mentality, really. AD is a bit more savvy and skilled, while Giannis is a bit more physical, aggressive, and intense. So yeah, this one is a really hard one for me. But one thing that can be said about AD is, he took that LA team. Granted, there are several new pieces on this LA team that weren't there last year. Overall, it is a pretty different team. But he did come to a team that was one of the worst defensive teams in the league last season and turned them into a top 3, top 4 defense this season, which is a huge accomplishment. Just looking at their defensive box plus minus metrics, AD has a 2.8 defensive box plus minus, and Giannis has a 4.1. So Giannis is ahead by quite a bit in that category, in that metric. I don't know exactly what all goes into a defensive box plus minus. I do assume that a bit of that discrepancy can be attributed to AD guarding the best player on the other team, usually being assigned with a very tough defensive assignment, and Giannis usually just guarding whoever is the worst shooter on the other team and really lurking and getting a lot more stuff done just because he has the freedom to sag off and kind of roam a little bit. So I'm guessing that metric is kind of hard to compare these two players with just because of how different their playstyles are, and it doesn't really account for, the context of that. But yeah, it really could go either way for me, to be honest. I'd be super happy and not argue with anybody choosing either one of these guys this season. But to be honest, I think I might be leaning a little towards Giannis just because of the Bucks defense being as good as it is this season, as historically great as it is, and Giannis being, the main factor, the main cog in that. I just think that might be a little bit more deserving of a case in my eyes. But I'd love to hear, any other cases or any other things that other people might have to say about it. Just going off of my thoughts right now, I think I'm going to pick Giannis for this award. So if he does win it, like I said before, he joins Hakeem and Jordan as the only players ever to win MVP and Defensive Player of the Year in the same year. Well, assuming he does win MVP. I saw Jacoby on Jalen and Jacoby. He was talking about LeBron. I was really surprised to hear him having that opinion. LeBron being most valuable player this season. Some other analysts, some of those analysts are like Kendrick Perkins and some other ex-players. It's a bit of a scary situation in my eyes. I think that it would be a pretty big mistake if they do give the award to LeBron this year. Not saying he's not a deserving MVP caliber playing player this year, like I said last episode. Just the season that Giannis has had this year, I think it would be just complete theft to not give it to him. He'd be completely robbed of this award if he's not given the MVP, in my eyes. So that was the Defensive Player of the Year award broken down. I don't know how great of a job I did. It was that was a pretty tough one for me, trying to pick one. So, it was a bit of a wishy-washy decision, but I think just to really stick with the decision, I think I'm going to pick Giannis. So I am officially picking Giannis as the Defensive Player of the Year on this podcast right now. So I'm about to leave to go on a trip with a few of my friends to Colorado for the weekend, and a little bit more than a weekend, but I'll be back next week to make more episodes. I didn't get through all the episodes, obviously, that I wanted to before games started up. Games start up tomorrow, and I'm going to be watching some of those with my friends. But yeah, I'm really excited for the season to start. Excited for that Clippers-Lakers game. I'm also excited for the Jazz-Pelicans game. That's going to be fun to watch. I'm going to touch on the Jazz later when I do a Dark Horse Contender episode, but just a sneak peek to that. I really have been just counting out the Jazz, really, in the bubble, honestly. Like, just counting them out ever since Bogdanovich came out as being, having surgery and not being available in the bubble. I kind of just wrote him off for some reason. But watching one of their scrimmages that they played, I think it was against the Heat. I'm pretty sure they were playing the Heat. But just watching that one, Mike Conley looked so good. I know I only watched like a few minutes of it while I was at my parents' house, but Mike Conley did look really good, better than I've seen him all season. He hasn't really had, obviously he was a super good point guard in Memphis those last couple of years. He's had a lot of adjustments to make coming and being a part of this Jazz team, just a very different system to be a part of, and I've also heard that the Jazz are one of the hardest teams to adjust to get into the rhythm of, just because of how unorthodox and wild and complicated Quinn Snyder is, the head coach. The game plan and offenses and things that they run there are just really different compared to most teams. But, also him being alongside Marc Gasol his entire career in Memphis, really being pick and pop threat more so than a pick and roll like he has now with Rudy Gobert. And I think that big difference has been, something to adjust to as well and get used to. With Marc Gasol in the pick and pop, or, they would pick and short roll, where if he would hit him on the roll, Marc Gasol would catch it in the middle of the lane and really facilitate from there, not necessarily just roll right to the rim. And I think that's just a very different offensive scheme than what they have him and Gobert running, which is, just straight up pick and roll, usually a lob type of thing, which Mike Conley just has not really done any of that in his career thus far. So it's just a different situation. Also, just having the ball in his hands a lot less, with having Donovan Mitchell as primary ball handler a lot, and also just having good offensive pieces out there like Joe Ingles and Bogdanovich, are both good ball handlers as well, deserving of possessions. But with Bogdanovich out, Conley slides in. He's really going to be a part of the starting lineup for sure. Before, they were experimenting with bringing him in as the sixth man and starting Joe Ingles. But with Bogdanovich out, I'm sure that they will have Mike Conley starting, and I think that he really can fill a bit of that void that they had with Bogdanovich, that they're going to have with Bogdanovich out now, which, Bogdanovich really provided floor spacing and a little bit of facilitating was a lot of what Bogdanovich did, which are both things that Mike Conley is great at. So obviously he's doing it from a different position on the floor, but those are two of his main strengths as well. So that'll be interesting to see. And I think that the Jazz actually do have something to roll with and could make some noise in a playoff series, to be honest with you. Even though I kind of just wrote them off before, I think they are a team that will be interesting to watch. Hopefully I get through some more episodes pretty soon, within this next week or so, when I come back. When I come back from my trip, I'll only be back for a couple days, and one of those days is my birthday, and then I'll be leaving to go to Orlando, actually, on a family vacation. So I will be in Orlando while the bubble and the games, in Disney World are happening, but I won't be able to go to them, obviously, because they don't allow fans in. But that's just going to be interesting and that's just going to be a weird feeling that I'm just so close to all the NBA players that I would want to meet, basically. Not to be mean to Zach LaVine or a bunch of people on the bottom 8 teams, but a lot of those players that I would love to meet or see in person, they're all going to be not too far from me. It's just going to be a weird feeling, but that's just how it's got to be. And we also had this vacation planned to go to Orlando way before, any of the bubble talk started, before COVID even happened. So that was just a coincidence. I'd love to get through more episodes though, when I come back from that. Maybe in between while I stop here again between trips. I might get an episode in, hopefully. But we're looking at like Dark Horse Contenders. Gonna finish out the season awards with Coach of the Year, Rookie of the Year, all rookie teams, Sixth Man of the Year, Most Improved Player. We're gonna talk about all those things. We're also gonna touch on the Western Conference playoff race, which I think might need to be the next episode because regular season games are already starting. So that Western Conference playoff race is already starting. Tomorrow is when those games start. So I think that might need to be the next episode, but we'll see. As always, thank you guys for listening. If you like the podcast, press like on YouTube, consider following the channel, and also if you're listening on Spotify, please consider following the Spotify feed. But yeah, overall, I've really enjoyed doing this so far, and I'm thankful for anybody listening. Thank you, and I'll talk to you guys next time.